The churning waters of the Sweetwater River crashed through the valley with a fury that shook the earth, sweeping away everything Nora Holbrook had built in her 24 years of life. She stood on the ridge, her honey-blonde hair whipping around her face as she watched her small homestead disappear beneath the raging floodwaters of 1878. The Wyoming Territory had never seen such rainfall, turning the normally peaceful river into a monster that devoured the land without mercy. "Pa!" Nora screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the deluge. She had watched helplessly as her father's form disappeared beneath the torrent when he'd gone back for their family Bible. That was 3 days ago. Now, as the waters finally began to recede, all that remained of her childhood home was splinters of wood, scraps of fabric, and mud. So much mud. The spring flood had claimed everything her father, their modest ranch, the small herd of cattle they'd spent years building, even the locket containing the only image she had of her mother. Nora stood alone on the hillside, wearing the only dress she had left, a faded blue calico that hung damp against her skin despite the warm June sun. "Miss, you've been standing there since sunrise. You ought to come down before you catch your death." Nora turned to find a tall man watching her from atop a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the concern in his eyes as blue as a summer sky. Lean and broad-shouldered, he sat easily in his saddle with the confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "There's nothing down there for me anymore," Nora replied, her voice hollow. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened deer. "Name's Lucas Vaughn. I run cattle on the North Ridge. Been watching the river for 3 days now. Did you see anyone else?" Hope flickered briefly in Nora's chest. A man about 60, gray hair. Lucas removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 30. "I'm sorry, miss. Haven't seen anyone else." The faint hope died as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm Nora Holbrook," she said, the words catching in her throat. "That was my father's homestead." She gestured toward the devastation below. Lucas followed her gaze, his expression grim. "The Sweetwater's never risen this high in all my years here. Took out Johnson's mill and half the lower pastures, too." "Where will you go now?" he asked after a moment of respectful silence. The question caught Nora off guard. She hadn't thought beyond standing vigil over the ruins of her life. "I don't know. I don't have any family left. There's Rock Springs about 15 miles west. They might have worked in the hotel or no." Nora's voice was stronger now, edged with determination. "This is my land. My father worked too hard for me to abandon it." Lucas studied her for a long moment, taking in her mud-stained dress and the fierce set of her jaw. Despite the tragedy etched across her face, there was a fire in her eyes that spoke of resilience. "You can't stay here, Miss Holbrook. There's nothing left to salvage, and the ground won't be dry enough to rebuild for weeks, maybe longer. Then I'll wait." Nora crossed her arms over her chest. A hint of admiration flickered across Lucas's face. "At least come to my place for a hot meal and proper rest. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would have my hide if I left a lady out here alone." Nora hesitated, pride warring with practicality. She was exhausted, hungry, and had nowhere else to go. "Just for a meal," she conceded finally. "Then I need to find what's left of our things." Lucas nodded, satisfied with the small victory. He guided her to his horse and helped her mount before climbing up behind her. The closeness made Nora stiffen, but exhaustion soon had her leaning back against his solid chest as they rode away from the devastation. Lucas Vaughn's ranch sat high on a ridge overlooking the valley, far above the reach of even the most ambitious floodwaters. The main house was modest, but sturdy, a two-story structure built of local timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, Nora could see cattle grazing on lush pastureland. "You've done well for yourself," she observed as they approached the house. "Been here 7 years," Lucas replied. "Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and a dream." There was no boastfulness in his tone, just simple acknowledgement of hard work. An older Chinese woman emerged from the house as they dismounted, her stern expression softening at the sight of Nora. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Holbrook. She lost everything in the flood. She'll be joining us for dinner and staying the night." "I never agreed to," Nora began, but Mrs. Chen was already ushering her toward the house. "Too skinny," the woman declared, examining Nora with critical eyes. "Need food, bath, rest." Her accent was thick but her meaning clear. Too weary to argue, Nora allowed herself to be guided into the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful rugs and solid, well-crafted furniture. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room where a small fire chased away the evening chill. Mrs. Chen led Nora upstairs to a bedroom that smelled of cedar and lavender. A large copper tub stood ready, steam rising from the water within. "Bath first. Then food, Mrs. Chen instructed, laying out a simple cotton nightdress and robe. "Clothes washed tomorrow." Left alone, Nora sank into the hot water with a sigh that came from the depths of her soul. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had the luxury of a proper bath. At home, it had been quick scrubs with water heated on their small stove, never enough to truly soak away the aches. As she washed away days of grime and grief, tears finally came silent at first, then in great, heaving sobs that echoed off the wooden walls. Nora cried for her father, for their lost home, for the uncertain future stretching before her. By the time she emerged, dressed in the borrowed nightclothes that hung loose on her frame, Nora felt hollow but somehow lighter. Mrs. Chen was waiting to escort her downstairs, where the table was set for 3. Lucas rose when she entered, looking almost as transformed as she felt. He'd washed away the trail dust, his dark hair still damp, and changed into a clean shirt. Without the shadow of his hat, his features were more distinct, a strong jawline softened by surprisingly full lips, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "You look better," he said simply. "Thank you," Nora replied, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed clothes. "For everything." Dinner was rabbit stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from what Mrs. Chen proudly called her victory garden. The food was simple but delicious, and Nora realized she was ravenous. She ate with unladylike enthusiasm, earning an approving nod from Mrs. Chen. "Tomorrow we'll ride down and see what can be salvaged from your place," Lucas said as they finished the meal. "The waters should be low enough by now." "You don't need to help me," Nora said. "You've done enough already." Lucas set down his coffee cup. "Miss Holbrook, I don't mean to overstep, but you can't do this alone, not safely. I've been taking care of myself and my father for years. I'm stronger than I look." "I don't doubt it," he replied with surprising gentleness. "But even the strongest person needs help sometimes." Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Chen cleared her throat meaningfully. "Young lady needs rest. Talk tomorrow." Nora didn't argue. The emotional day and full meal had left her barely able to keep her eyes open. She thanked her hosts and followed Mrs. Chen back upstairs, falling into the soft bed and into unconsciousness almost simultaneously. She dreamed of water, endless rushing water, and her father's voice calling her name. When she woke with a start, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment, Nora was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of her own small bedroom. Reality crashed back as quickly and painfully as the flood itself. Downstairs, she found Lucas at the table studying a map. He looked up when she entered, a brief smile lighting his features. "Mrs. Chen left breakfast for you," he said, gesturing to a covered plate. "She's gone to trade with the Johnson family, said she'd be back by supper." Nora uncovered the plate to find biscuits, bacon, and eggs still warm from the stove. "Your housekeeper is a treasure," she said, sitting down. "More than a housekeeper. She and her husband helped me build this place. He passed 2 winters ago, but she stayed on. Says I'd starve without her, and she's probably right." As they ate, Lucas outlined his plan for the day. They would ride down to Nora's property to search for anything salvageable, then stop in the small town of Sweetwater Crossing for supplies. "I've been thinking about your situation," Lucas said as they rode toward the devastated valley later that morning. "The flat where your house stood isn't safe. The river's changed course and that land will flood again." "It's all I have," Nora replied, tension creeping into her voice. "Your deeds for the whole 160 acres, right? Not just the house site." Nora nodded, not seeing where this was going. "The northeast corner of your property rises onto the same ridge as mine, higher ground, safe from flooding. I know the spot. My father always said we should have built there, but it was farther from the river for water and harder to clear for planting." Lucas slowed his horse as they approached the muddy expanse that had once been her home. "You could rebuild there. I could help." Nora stared at him, suspicious. "Why would you do that?" "Being neighborly," he replied with a slight shrug. "And I need the help just as much as you do. Lost some fencing and cattle in the flood myself. 2 pairs of hands make lighter work." It was a sensible arrangement, but Nora wasn't used to accepting help so easily. Her father had raised her to be independent after her mother died in childbirth. Still, she had to admit the prospect of facing rebuilding alone was daunting. "Let me think about it," she said finally as they dismounted at the edge of the devastation. The scene was even more heartbreaking in the clear light of day. Little remained of the small cabin beyond the stone chimney and foundation. Debris was scattered across the muddy expanse, broken furniture, sodden books, household items half buried in silt. "Pa built that chimney stone by stone," Nora said softly, approaching the structure that stood like a monument among the ruins. "Said it would outlast us all. Guess he was right." They worked methodically through the wreckage, salvaging what they could, a few cooking utensils. Nora's mother's cast iron skillet, a wooden box containing damp but legible family documents. Each recovered item was a small victory against the destruction. Near what had been the back wall of the cabin, Nora froze, her breath catching. There, half buried in mud, was her father's Bible. With trembling hands, she carefully extracted it from the muck. The leather cover was stained and warped, but the gilt edges of the pages still gleamed dully in the sunlight. "He went back for this," she whispered, cradling the book. "It's why he didn't make it out." Lucas stood quietly beside her, offering silent support. After a moment, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "He must have loved you very much to risk everything for something so important to your family." "It was the last thing my mother touched before she died," Nora explained, fingers tracing the embossed cover. "Her name is written inside, and mine." They continued their search until mid-afternoon, recovering enough to fill the saddlebags on Lucas's horse. Of her father, they found no trace, and Nora finally accepted what she had known in her heart since the flood: he was truly gone, likely carried downstream by the powerful currents. "We should head to town," Lucas said gently when he saw her flagging. "Get supplies before the store closes." Sweetwater Crossing was little more than a wide spot in the trail, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of houses clustered around a dusty main street. Still, it represented civilization and normalcy after the chaos of the flood. At the general store, Lucas insisted on purchasing supplies for both of them: flour, coffee, salt, bacon, and other essentials. When Nora protested, he waved her off. "Consider it a loan until you're back on your feet," he said. "You can pay me back with eggs when you get chickens again." The proprietor, a balding man named Harold Jenkins, peered at Nora over wire-rimmed spectacles. "You're John Holbrook's girl, ain't you? Heard about your place. Terrible shame." "Yes, sir," Nora replied, steeling herself against the pity in his eyes. "Your pa was a good man, fair in his dealings." Jenkins lowered his voice. "They found 2 bodies downstream yesterday. Neither was your father, but Sheriff Miller's organized a search along the riverbanks. If they find anything, they'll let you know." Nora nodded, unable to speak through the sudden tightness in her throat. As they left the store, a commotion across the street drew their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in argument. "That's Roy Blackburn," Lucas said, nodding toward a heavy-set man gesturing angrily. "Owns the big spread east of here. Been trying to buy up land all over the valley." "I know him," Nora replied, her expression hardening. "He tried to pressure my father into selling last year, offered half what the land was worth." As if sensing their gaze, Blackburn looked up, his eyes narrowing when he spotted Nora. He said something to his companions and crossed the street toward them. "Miss Holbrook," he called, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Sorry to hear about your troubles, and your father a terrible loss." "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," Nora replied stiffly. "I understand your property was hit hard by the flood." Blackburn's sympathetic tone didn't reach his calculating eyes. "Must be overwhelming for a young woman alone. My offer to purchase still stands, adjusted for the flood damage, of course." Lucas stepped forward slightly, his posture subtly protective. "Miss Holbrook isn't making any decisions about her property right now, Blackburn." Blackburn's gaze flicked to Lucas, dismissive. "This is a private business matter, Vaughn. Doesn't concern you." "Mr. Blackburn," Nora interjected, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior, "I have no intention of selling my land. Not to you, not to anyone. Good day." She turned away, ignoring Blackburn's protests as Lucas helped her mount his horse. They rode out of town in silence, Nora's back rigid with indignation. "That man is a vulture," she said when they were well beyond the town limits, "trying to profit from tragedy." "He's been buying up flooded land all along the valley," Lucas confirmed. "Offering pennies on the dollar to desperate folks with nowhere else to go." "Well, he won't get my land." Nora's determination hardened into resolve. "I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughn. I want to rebuild on the high ground. Will you really help me?" Lucas's smile was slow and genuine. "I gave my word, didn't I? We'll start tomorrow." They returned to Lucas's ranch as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in fiery hues. Mrs. Chen had prepared a hearty stew and hot biscuits, clucking disapprovingly at the mud still clinging to their boots. That evening, as Nora sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Lucas joined her with 2 cups of coffee. "I've been thinking about your house," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "Nothing fancy, but solid. 2 rooms to start, a main room for cooking and living, and a bedroom. We can add on later as needed." Nora raised an eyebrow. Lucas cleared his throat. "Figure of speech, I meant you, of course." "It sounds perfect," she said after a moment. "Simple but sturdy. Like my father would have built." Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We'll need lumber. I can get some from my own stand of pines and we'll have to purchase the rest in Rock Springs. There's a sawmill there that wasn't affected by the flood." As they discussed plans for the new house, Nora felt something stir within her, a tentative hope that had seemed impossible just days before. Lucas Vaughn was a stranger, yet she found herself trusting him in a way that both surprised and unsettled her. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked suddenly. "And don't say it's just being neighborly." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I came west with nothing after losing everything in the war," he finally said. "A stranger helped me when I needed it most. Said all he wanted in return was for me to do the same for someone else someday." He turned to look at her, his eyes sincere. "Guess it's time to pay that debt." Nora nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Then I'll have to find a way to pay it forward someday too." "That's how it works," Lucas agreed with a smile. The next morning brought new purpose and activity. After breakfast, they rode to Nora's property, this time bringing tools, rope, and stakes to mark out the site for the new house. The northeast corner of her land rose gracefully onto a ridge that overlooked the valley below, offering a stunning view of the distant mountains. "It's beautiful up here," Nora said as they dismounted. "I'd forgotten how lovely the view is." "Good soil, too," Lucas noted, digging his heel into the ground. "You could have a garden here, maybe an orchard in time." They spent the morning clearing brush and marking the dimensions of the house, 20 feet by 16, with the foundation slightly elevated as an extra precaution against future floods. Lucas showed Nora how to identify the best trees for lumber, and they felled 3 large pines, working together to strip the branches and prepare the logs for transport. As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent working on the building site, clearing land, digging foundation holes, hauling stones for the chimney. Afternoons often found them cutting lumber from Lucas's property or making trips to Rock Springs for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. Word of their project spread through the valley, and others began to stop by to offer help. The Johnsons, whose mill had been damaged but not destroyed, provided milled lumber at a discount. The blacksmith from Sweetwater Crossing rode out to help with the iron fittings for the doors and windows. Even the minister came one day, bringing with him a small group of congregants who raised the frame walls in a single afternoon. Through it all, Lucas remained a steady presence, guiding, teaching, working alongside Nora without complaint or condescension. He treated her as an equal partner in the building, showing her how to notch logs, lay flooring, and chink walls. "My father never let me help with the real building," Nora admitted one afternoon as they worked side by side setting the roof beams. "Said it wasn't women's work." Lucas handed her a nail. "My mother helped build our barn back in Missouri. Said any work that needed doing was everybody's work." "I like your mother's thinking," Nora replied with a smile. As the weeks passed, the house took shape, a simple but solid structure rising from the ridge like a promise kept. The walls went up, a new stone chimney grew alongside them, windows were set, and a sturdy roof was shingled against the coming winter. Through the long days of hard work, something else was taking shape as well, something neither Nora nor Lucas had anticipated. It began with small moments. The brush of hands as they passed tools back and forth, shared laughter over mishaps, quiet conversations as they rested in the shade during the hottest part of the day. Nora found herself watching Lucas when he wasn't looking, admiring the grace with which he swung an axe, the patience he showed when teaching her a new skill, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. For his part, Lucas seemed to find reasons to stay close to her, to offer assistance even when she was managing fine on her own. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course. "Young man different since you come," she told Nora one evening as they prepared supper together. Smile more, talk more. We're just friends, Nora protested, feeling her cheeks warm. He's been kind enough to help me rebuild. Mrs. Chen's knowing smile said she wasn't fooled. I old not blind, she replied with a soft chuckle. By late August, the house was nearly complete, lacking only the final touches of paint and furnishings. It stood proudly on the ridge, its windows catching the golden light of sunset as Nora and Lucas sat on the newly built porch steps, admiring their handiwork. It's more beautiful than I imagined, Nora said, genuine wonder in her voice. I never thought I'd have a home again after the flood. It still needs furniture, Lucas pointed out, and curtains. Women like curtains, don't they? Nora laughed. Yes, we do tend to appreciate curtains and chairs. And a bed would be nice. I've been thinking about that, Lucas said, suddenly serious. There's a cabinet maker in Rock Springs who owes me a favor. I thought maybe he could make you a bed frame and a table to start with. Lucas, you've done so much already, I can't ask for more. You're not asking, I'm offering. He hesitated, then added, besides, I've grown used to having you around. The place will seem too quiet when you move out here. The implication of his words hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Nora studied his profile in the fading light, seeing the tension in his jaw as he waited for her response. I've grown used to being around too, she admitted softly. Lucas turned to face her, their eyes meeting in the golden light. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they finally broke apart, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I didn't plan on this happening, he murmured. Neither did I, Nora replied with a small smile. But I'm glad it did. The next day brought a surprise visitor, Sheriff Miller from Sweetwater Crossing, riding up to Lucas's ranch just as they were preparing to head to Nora's building site. Miss Holbrook, he called, removing his hat as he dismounted. Been trying to find you, got some news about your father. Nora's heart stuttered in her chest. After weeks without word, she had begun to accept that her father's body might never be recovered. We found him, Miller continued, his expression solemn but not unkind. About 20 miles downstream. He's been properly buried in the town cemetery with Reverend Parker saying the words. Thought you'd want to know. Tears welled in Nora's eyes, not just of grief, but of relief. Thank you, Sheriff. That means more than you know. Miller nodded, uncomfortable with her emotion. There's something else. He was still clutching something when we found him. The sheriff reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it out to Nora. Figured it must be important for him to hold onto it like that. In his palm lay a tarnished silver locket, the one containing her mother's portrait that Nora had thought lost forever. She took it with trembling hands, unable to speak through her tears. Lucas stepped forward. Thank you for bringing it, Sheriff, and for giving her father a proper burial. Least we could do, Miller replied. Miss Holbrook, folks in town been wondering about you, heard you're rebuilding up on the ridge. Nora nodded, wiping away tears. Yes, we're almost finished with the house. Good to hear. Oh, and one more thing, Roy Blackburn's been asking questions about your property, claiming you abandoned it after the flood. Thought you should know he's filed a petition with the land office trying to claim it for himself. Lucas's expression darkened. He can't do that. Nora's been actively improving the property. That's what I told him, Miller agreed. But he's got friends in the territorial government. Might be worth making sure your paperwork's in order. After the sheriff departed, Lucas found Nora sitting on the porch steps, the locket open in her hands. Inside was a faded daguerreotype of a young woman with Nora's same honey blonde hair and gentle smile. She was beautiful, Lucas said, sitting beside her. My father never stopped loving her, Nora replied. even after 24 years. He used to say that real love doesn't die, it just changes form. She closed the locket and slipped it around her neck. I need to go into town tomorrow, see about Blackburn's claim and visit my father's grave. I'll go with you, Lucas said immediately. Nora placed her hand over his. Thank you for everything. The following day found them in the land office in Sweetwater Crossing, where the clerk confirmed Sheriff Miller's warning. Roy Blackburn had indeed filed a petition claiming abandonment of the Holbrook property. But I can see that's clearly not the case, the clerk said after examining the documentation. Lucas and Nora provided detailed records of the materials purchased, improvements made, and affidavits from neighbors attesting to their continuous work on the property. I'll make note that the claim is actively being developed and inhabited. Mr. Blackburn's petition won't stand. Relief flooded through Nora, but Lucas remained tense. Blackburn isn't one to give up easily, he warned as they left the office. He's used to getting what he wants. Well, he's not getting my land, Nora declared firmly. They made their way to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where a fresh grave marked with a simple wooden cross stood beneath a cottonwood tree. Nora knelt beside it, placing the wildflowers they had gathered on their way into town atop the mounded earth. He would have liked this spot, she said, her voice steady despite the grief that still tugged at her heart. He always did like sitting in the shade of a good tree. Lucas stood respectfully nearby, giving her space for her private goodbye. When she finally rose and rejoined him, there was a new peace in her expression. He'd be proud of you, Lucas told her as they walked back toward their horses. Building a new life from the ashes of the old one takes courage. I had help, Nora reminded him with a small smile. As they mounted their horses, a commotion down the street caught their attention. Roy Blackburn was emerging from the saloon, surrounded by several of his ranch hands. When he spotted Nora and Lucas, his face darkened with anger. Holbrook, he called, striding toward them. Heard you've been causing trouble at the land office. Lucas moved his horse protectively between Nora and the advancing man. The only one causing trouble is you, Blackburn, filing false claims on land you know isn't abandoned. Blackburn's face flushed with anger. That valley land is worthless now, good for nothing but grazing. Been trying to put together a proper cattle operation for years, but you small-timers keep getting in the way. It's my land, Nora said clearly, guiding her horse around Lucas to face Blackburn directly. Worthless or not, it's mine, and I'm not selling. We'll see about that, Blackburn sneered. Accidents happen all the time to half-built houses, especially those so far from town. The threat hung in the air between them, unmistakable and ugly. Lucas's hand drifted to the pistol at his hip, but Nora shook her head slightly. Is that how you do business, Mr. Blackburn? With threats and intimidation? She asked, her voice carrying down the street. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation. Because it sounds to me like you're threatening arson in front of witnesses, including the sheriff. Blackburn glanced around, noticing for the first time the crowd that had gathered, including Sheriff Miller standing in the doorway of his office. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. Just stating facts, Miss Holbrook. Remote properties face many dangers. He touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness. Good day to you. As Blackburn stalked away, Lucas exhaled slowly. That man's trouble, Nora. We need to be careful. We will be, she agreed, but I won't let him scare me off my land. They returned to find Mrs. Chen in a state of agitation. Riders come, she told them as soon as they dismounted. 4 men. Ask questions about new house, not friendly. Lucas's expression hardened. Blackburn's men. He didn't waste any time. What do we do? Nora asked, fear finally creeping into her voice. We finish your house. Lucas replied firmly. "And we keep watch." For the next week, they worked with renewed urgency, completing the interior of the house, installing the cast iron stove rescued from Nora's old cabin, hanging the doors, finishing the floors with a layer of polished beeswax. Lucas insisted on staying at the new house overnight, sleeping on a bedroll by the door while Nora used the newly delivered bed in the bedroom. "Just until we're sure Blackburn's given up," he explained when she protested the arrangement. But Blackburn hadn't given up. On a moonless night in early September, Lucas woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching. He roused Nora quickly, his finger to his lips as he guided her to the back window. "Riders coming," he whispered. "At least 3. In the dim light of a single lantern, they could make out the shapes of mounted men approaching the house. One carried a flaming torch. "They're going to burn us out," Nora breathed, horror in her voice. Lucas checked his revolver. "Get your shotgun. If they want to fight, they'll get one." But before they could position themselves to defend the house, more hoofbeats sounded from the east, a large group moving fast. The approaching riders with the torch halted in confusion. "Blackburn!" A familiar voice called out. It was Sheriff Miller, accompanied by at least a dozen townsmen. "Drop that torch and raise your hands. You're surrounded." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackburn's men might fight. Then, with a curse, the leader flung the torch away into the dirt where it sputtered out harmlessly. "This isn't over, Vaughn," he shouted toward the house. "Oh, I think it is," Sheriff Miller replied, riding forward into the lantern light. "Roy Blackburn, you're under arrest for attempted arson and criminal conspiracy." Nora and Lucas emerged cautiously onto the porch, watching as the sheriff and his posse disarmed and bound Blackburn and his men. "How did you know?" Lucas asked as Miller approached. "Mrs. Chen," the sheriff replied with a hint of a smile. "Smart woman. Rode into town this afternoon saying she overheard Blackburn's men planning something for tonight. We've been waiting over the ridge for hours." Relief washed over Nora. "Thank you, Sheriff, and please thank everyone who came." As the posse departed with their prisoners, Lucas turned to Nora, suddenly looking uncertain. "Guess you'll be safe here now. No need for me to stay anymore." Nora studied his face in the soft glow of the lantern light. "Is that what you want, to leave?" "No," he admitted quietly. "That's not what I want at all." "Then stay," she said simply, reaching for his hand. "Not just tonight, stay for good." Lucas looked at her in surprise. "Nora, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Lucas Vaughn." The words came easily, naturally, as if she'd been waiting to say them for a long time. "I love the man who helped a stranger who'd lost everything, who built me a house on higher ground, who taught me that life can begin again after loss." Lucas's smile was slow and beautiful in the lantern light. He drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. "I love you too," he murmured against her lips. "Have since I saw you standing on that ridge, refusing to give up even when everything was gone." Under a sky filled with stars, they stood together on the porch of the house they had built, a monument not just to survival, but to the unexpected ways love can bloom from the ashes of devastation. 3 days later, they were married in a simple ceremony on that same porch, with Mrs. Chen beaming proudly and half the town in attendance. Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the new beginning they had forged together. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. The house on the ridge grew as their family did, first with the addition of a nursery for their son John, named for Nora's father, born just 10 months after their wedding. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later with Lucas's dark hair and Nora's determined spirit. The land that had once been devastated by flood slowly healed and transformed. Lucas and Nora combined their properties, creating one of the most successful small cattle operations in the territory. They planted an orchard on the slope below the house, and Nora's garden became famous throughout the valley for its abundance. Roy Blackburn served a year in the territorial prison before returning to find his ranch in financial ruin. He sold what remained and moved east, his dreams of a cattle empire washed away like so much flood debris. On warm summer evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, Lucas and Nora could still be found sitting together on the porch of their house on the ridge. Sometimes they spoke of the flood that had brought them together, of how devastation had ultimately led to their greatest happiness. You ever wonder what would have happened if the river hadn't risen that spring? Nora asked one such evening, her hand still fitting perfectly in his despite the years that had weathered them both. Lucas considered the question, his gaze moving over the prosperous land they had built together, to the distant bend in the Sweetwater River that had forever altered their lives. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, content in the certainty that he was right. From the ruins of her old life, they had built something stronger, something lasting, a love as solid as the house on higher ground that had sheltered them through all the seasons of their lives together. In the distance, the Sweetwater River caught the light of the setting sun, flowing peacefully now through the valley it had once devastated. Like the water that could both destroy and nurture, life had taught them that endings often contain the seeds of new beginnings, that sometimes losing everything was simply the first step on the path to finding something more precious than they had ever imagined. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lucas Vaughn pressed a gentle kiss to his wife's temple, grateful beyond words for the flood that had brought her to him, and for the love that had given them both a home on higher ground.